Noah, you've done some work on the southwestern part of the United States. How hot, how bad is it going to get in the southwestern, in other parts of the United States? You've done some modeling there on what we can expect regarding heat in the climate era.
Yeah, so we had a paper, a student and I had a paper that came out this summer on the US and what we might expect over the next 3 decades as greenhouse gas concentrations increase. And what we expect in terms of the carbon dioxide concentrations is relatively moderate over the next 3 decades compared to a lot of the scenarios that we hear about, say, for the year 2100. So this is a global warming envelope that falls within the Copenhagen Accord, for example. So we wanted to focus on this near-term period to try
and it falls within the life period of most people in this room and listening to this on the radio, something people can relate to. That's one of my frustrations with climate science is like 2100, I'm like, a lot of people respond, and I know you guys have more confidence the further out you go. So anyways, continue about closer in, 30 years.
Well, so those are the reasons you mentioned were part of why we were interested in this period. And so over this period, we expect something on the order of another degree Celsius of global warming relative to the last decade. And we find that over the US, the summer temperatures increase 2 to 3 degrees Celsius as a result of that 1 degree of global warming. So an enhancement over the US relative to the global average. And then if we look at individual points in the US and ask how often do historical hot events occur, so what, say, the hottest season of the second half of the 20th century or the longest heat wave that occurred in the second half of the 20th century, how often does an event of that magnitude occur going forward? We find that by the decade of the 2030s, what was the hottest season of the second half of the 20th century occurs anywhere from 5 to 8 times in the US. And in the southwestern part of the US, the warming is very robust, very intense. And most areas see something on the order of 7 or 8 of those historically hottest seasons in a single decade.
So the former extremes become the new norm?
To the extent that 7 years out of 10 is normal, then...
If you're a baseball player, you hit 7 out of 10, you're in the Hall of Fame. So, right? So the things that used to be unusual are going to be more common in terms of the heat extremes.
The most unusual summer of the second half of the 20th century, we project to happen 7 or 8 times in a decade in the southwestern US.
And are you able, policymakers often are frustrated because the models are so macro that they don't give them actionable intelligence, actionable information within their congressional district or their state or their area of responsibility, a water district, that sort of thing. How close are these models getting to give policymakers information they can act on to say, look, this is going to affect our water supply here. We got to start building desalination plants or whatever we're doing, responding, preparing for these sorts of things.
Well, so we've pushed over the last 5 years or so to dividing the world up into 25-kilometer boxes, so say 15 miles on a side.
Let me ask you a question. You're talking in kilometers and Celsius, and most Americans live in miles and Fahrenheit, and Celsius and kilometers, even with, don't translate. Is that a scientific convention, or that doesn't translate well to mainstream?
Well, it's absolutely a scientific convention. In fact, if a paper is submitted with those English units rather than what we call SI units, it will actually be sent back, and the authors will be required to change all of the units. So it's more than a convention.
So this is an example of having to sort of run off a different operating system when you do your scientific work versus your communication work, to speak in miles versus in one part of your life and speak in kilometers in another part of your life.
If you're speaking to the public in the US.
Yeah.
There are countries that use most of the kilometers in Celsius.
Yes, so we're the exception. We dumb it down for America. Is that
At any rate, a lot of what my lab group does is try to push those spatial and also temporal resolutions. So to really try to get down to the scales that matter for humans and other living things. So it's pretty routine for us to look at say the county level, and now we're trying to get down really to the local level where we're looking at say 1 mile, dividing the world up into 1 mile boxes.